I'm Kaylee, and these are all the classics that I read in 2025. I read a lot of really great classics that I super loved this past year. I read a total of 38 classics. Some of them were, classics, and some of them were modern classics. But the cutoff point was 1970. If it was written before 1970, then it's on this list. Some of these were rereads of some of my old favorites, and a lot of them were new to me classics. This list is in no particular order. It's just completely random order, somewhat in the order in which I read them. Before we dive in, make sure that you subscribe if you want to hear more about classics. And of course, follow me over on Instagram and Goodreads and all the places. First, we're going to start out with some Agatha Christie. I read Evil Under the Sun, which is a Poirot book. And of course, I super love Poirot. And I read Death on the Nile a couple of months ago, which is another favorite Poirot book. And I read Hercule Poirot's Case Book, which is a collection of short stories from Poirot. So in case you can't tell, he's one of my favorite fictional detectives. I've already done other videos all about those favorite Agatha Christies. And of course, I will link those in the description so you can hear more about Poirot. I also had a bunch of Temple Bailey books in my Wrapped Books challenge. One of those was Little Girl Lost. This is about Araminta, who agrees to elope, mainly just so that she can get away from her annoying family. But then she sees her ex-boyfriend and decides not to elope after all. I really loved this sweet, clean romance. I like Temple Bailey's writing style and all the snappy dialogue in this book. And I especially enjoyed the Christian themes in the background. Another Temple Bailey was Silver Slippers. Joan thinks that she has found her true love when she meets Drew, and she agrees to an engagement. But the more they spend time together, she begins to realize that he's really selfish and jealous. And she turns for advice to her new acquaintance, Giles, a young man who owns a bookshop in town. I completely fell in love with Giles. He is just my hero of 2025. He's probably my favorite character of any book that I read in all of 2025. And, I might be biased, though, because he owns a bookshop. I can't help it, though. I completely fell in love with him, and I fell in love with this book. The first Temple Bailey book, I'm actually doing these backwards. The first Temple Bailey book that I read, though, was Wild Wind. Jacqueline is planning her wedding to her darling Christopher, but then the war comes. And while he's away at war, Jacqueline stays with her sister Mary. But even once the war is over, Jacqueline just feels she has this duty to take care of her sister and her sister's family and her sister's kids. And she keeps putting off her marriage to Christopher. This one is really dramatic because they're surviving through the stress of the war. There's just a lot of heartbreak that goes on, and then they're trying to piece their lives back together once the war is over. And there's just all these layers of interconnected characters. It's really wonderful. I gave it 4 stars. I also read Why Not by Margaret Whittemore. Rosamond buys a house by the lake and sets up a fortune-telling booth because, why not? That's just her whole philosophy of life is why not try something new and different? But her neighbor, Mr. Squire, is a very traditional person. This whole book is just so hilarious. The story is utterly ridiculous and wonderful. Rosamond is flighty and frivolous, but she kind of has her own brand of wisdom. And she brings a lot of fun into Mr. Squire's boring life. Completely delightful. I gave it 4 stars. I also read The Phantom of the Opera. Being a fan of the musical and movie and everything, I was like, it's about time that I actually read the original. And I've done a whole other video all about my thoughts on Phantom of the Opera because the book is very different from any movie or musical that you may have seen. But it's definitely a lot of fun, and you can check out the video to see more of my in-depth thoughts about Phantom of the Opera. I also read Sir Walter Scott's Heart of Midlothian, and this is probably the best book that I read all year. all year long. Every book, not just the classics, like every book. This is probably right at the top. Because first of all, I just love Sir Walter Scott, and this was just one of the best things that I've ever read from him. And of course, I've already done a very in-depth video about everything that I loved about Heart of Midlothian and why it has become such a favorite of mine. It's about this woman and her sister has been accused in the court, and so she travels all the way to London to ask for a pardon for her sister who is in jail. That is a very simplified plot summary. Of course, knowing Sir Walter Scott, you know that there's layer upon layer upon layer of characters and plot points and twists, and it's just so incredible. On a whim, I decided to reread The Blue Castle by Lucy Maud Montgomery, which is one of my favorites from this author. I have read it many, many times, and I enjoy it so much every time that I reread it. This is about Valancy, who decides to change her boring life and to break out of her shell and not to meet her social expectations and to just do whatever she wants. I always give The Blue Castle 5 stars. It is just such a wonderful, beautiful story. And I've also been rereading some books from J.R.R. Tolkien as part of the June Journeys with Inklings readathon. I reread The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which is a collection of poetry themed in Middle-earth, as if characters from Middle-earth had written this poetry. And I reread all of The Lord of the Rings, so Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and Return of the King. And of course, I've done tons of videos all about Tolkien and Middle-earth and Lord of the Rings. So I will link my Tolkien playlist in the description so you can see all the reasons why I love reading J.R.R. Tolkien. I also reread The Wind in the Willows. Somehow I always end up rereading The Wind in the Willows just about every year. Whenever I'm stressed out or I'm sick or something, I usually pick up either Wind in the Willows or The Secret Garden as like my comfort read. It just kind of takes me back to those nostalgic days of my childhood. Speaking of the nostalgic days of my childhood, I also reread Theater Shoes and Dancing Shoes. I really love the shoe books from Noel Stratfield, and I've read some of her other books as well. But somehow these three, Ballet Shoes, Theater Shoes, and Dancing Shoes, kind of end up being my favorites. And these stories are just so fun, so delightful. I enjoy rereading them every time. Another comfort read that I end up rereading every few years is The Phoenix and the Carpet. The first book in the series is Five Children and It. But I actually don't reread that one that often. I really prefer The Phoenix and the Carpet because the Phoenix is such a character. Like, he's such a nut. So the Phoenix kind of blundering around with these ridiculous children in 1904 London it just makes me laugh every time. It is just so hilarious. I also read The Flirt by Booth Tarkington. So Cora flirts with anything in pants and overshadows her older sister Laura at every party. The whole family has to put up with this long string of suitors coming to the house to see Cora. And their little brother Hedrick decides to get his revenge on his sisters, and he's always getting into mischief and causing trouble. This was kind of a weird book. Sometimes it seems like a romance, and then it's kind of like this crime mystery or a comedy, and it's kind of partly tragic at the end. It's just really, really bizarre, and some of the characters are like utterly insane. Like, these people are unhinged, okay? It was really fascinating, though. It was like this gorgeous train wreck of a book. And I read it in like 2 days, I think, because I couldn't put it down. That was an experience. There were, unfortunately, a couple of classics that I DNF'd. So I DNF'd The Good Soldier by Ford Madox Ford. It's all about this man who discovers that his wife has been cheating on him for years with this guy that he thought was a good soldier. And it was just horrendous. It was really awful. And I DNF'd that. I just couldn't. And then I DNF'd The Turquoise, which is about this girl who grows up in the American Southwest, and she's adopted by this poor family, and she takes up with this traveling magician, And it was just nasty, though. The content was just gross. So yeah, I DNF'd that. That was like, ugh, nasty. And I recently read another one from Temple Bailey, Burning Beauty. Virginia is overshadowed by her selfish brother, Ricky. He is convinced that he has the genius to write a best-selling novel, and she tries to support him. And Michael Macmillan is a famous editor who falls in love with Virginia. And of course, drama ensues. I liked that this romance is sweet, it's clean, it's wholesome. There are Christian themes throughout the book, like with all of Temple Bailey's books. It was really interesting to explore the nature of creativity and genius through Ricky's attempts at writing a best-selling novel. So that was an aspect of this book that I really enjoyed. I gave Burning Beauty 4 stars. I have been enjoying every single Temple Bailey book that I've been reading, and I'm really eager to read more from that author. I also read Guyfford of Weare by Geoffrey Farnell. So Sir Richard Guyfford is under suspicion of murdering his cousin Sir Julian, and Lady Helen D'Arcy vows to help Sir Richard find the true killer. And of course, through all of the murder mystery shenanigans, they fall in love. I like the writing style. It has a really beautiful, vivid language, but the romance is hilariously stupid. They are just constantly misunderstanding one another, and it's like, just tell the truth and talk to each other. It's kind of dumb. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was fun, but like nothing special. Then I read Paul Faber Surgeon, which is the second book in the Thomas Wingfold Curate series by George MacDonald. And of course, I adore George MacDonald. This was another favorite book from this year. This was the book that I read for Victober, and so I went into a lot more detail about everything that I love about George MacDonald in my Victober reading wrap-up, and so I will link that in the description so you can see more about George MacDonald and Paul Faber Surgeon. But basically, Paul Faber is a surgeon, and he's an atheist, but he's friends with Thomas Wingfold, the preacher, the curate. And so they have all of these lively discussions about, does God exist or not? And there are various different characters who are all kind of trying to come to grips with what do they really believe about God and how do they really have a personal relationship with Christ. There's just so much great Christian depth into this, and the characters are just so emotional and beautiful. I always love reading George MacDonald. I also read The Wheel on the School. This is where a group of school children are trying to find someone who will give them an old wheel so that they can put it on the roof of their schoolhouse, and it will make like a little platform, a little place where storks can come and nest. And of course, if storks nest on your roof, it's considered very good luck. As the obstacles against them continue to grow, the children refuse to give up, and soon the whole village is coming together to help them. I gave this 5 stars. This is so adorable. It's just, there's so many different layers of different villagers and all the children and everything. And this project inspires people to come together in kindness and generosity in ways that they had never done before. And it was just so gorgeous. 5 stars. I also reread Raffles the Amateur Cracksman, which is the first group of short stories about Raffles from E.W. Hornung. And he created the character of Raffles to be like a counterpoint to Sherlock Holmes because, of course, Raffles is clever and charming and wonderful, but he's a thief. I enjoyed rereading it for, I don't know, the second or third time or something, and kind of talking through the terrible morality of Raffles, but you just can't help but love him. He is just such a charming rogue. I also read Anthony Trollope's Can You Forgive Her? I've already done a whole other video all about Can You Forgive Her? This is about Alice who breaks off her engagement with John Gray, and then she's kind of engaged to her cousin, and she can't decide between these two men because she can't decide what type of life she wants. She wants excitement, and she feels like a life in the country would just be too boring. So we have to forgive her for being so wishy-washy. And of course, knowing Trollope, there are many different characters and different layers and lots of different plot lines that are all kind of all over the place. And then somehow it all comes back to Alice. There are just so many layers in this plot and so many complex characters, and I am just delighted with this beginning to the Palliser series. I cannot wait to read more from Trollope in this series. So make sure to watch the video if you want to hear all my in-depth thoughts about each of the characters and different plot points and all the things that I loved about Trollope. I also reread Two Noble Kinsmen from Shakespeare. This is definitely one of my favorite plays from Shakespeare because it's just so clever how all these little different plot points come together. And the two cousins are like, well, they're so noble. It's right there in the title. They're so noble and good. And this has some of the best female characters, I think, in all of Shakespeare. When I first read this one 8 years ago, I did a video about everything that I loved about Two Noble Kinsmen. And then rereading it this time, it just confirmed everything that I love about Shakespeare and about this play in particular. So you can always go over to see the video for Two Noble Kinsmen from 8 years ago about why I enjoyed it so much. I also read The House on the Strand from Daphne du Maurier, and it was just very weird and creepy, and I did not like it. It's about this guy who his friend is like experimenting by creating this drug in his laboratory, and he gets him to like try it out. And he goes back in time, like his mind goes back in time. And he gets obsessed with this other timeline from hundreds of years before. And he gets addicted to the drug and just keeps taking more and more of it. So it was really distressing to see him succumbing to this drug addiction and ignoring his wife and kids and all his family responsibilities. And he's lying to his doctor, just trying to get more of the drug. That's all he cares about anymore, is just getting more of the drug. And there were a lot of really immoral, nasty things that were happening in some of the scenes. And it was just like, oh, that's gross. So yeah, did not care for that. No, thank you. It was weird. I read The Bronze Bow, which is this wonderful story that is set in the time of Christ. And there's this young man who's very bitter, very angry at the Romans because they actually crucified his father as a criminal. So he joins this bandit gang and he's becoming a criminal himself. But then he meets Jesus and everything changes. He's finally able to let go of his bitterness and anger and create a good life for himself. It's absolutely wonderful. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful story. It's wonderfully written. Everything about it is just fantastic. 5 stars. I also reread Patricia, which is probably one of my favorite books from Grace Livingston Hill. Patricia was published in 1939. Patricia has grown up in a wealthy household, but she befriends John, who is just a poor boy from public school. And as they go through their school days together, they have kind of a special connection, but they're not really quite friends because they just run in different circles. But then they reconnect years later when they're older. This is probably one of the best books from Grace Livingston Hill. The romance is just so wholesome and meaningful because it's not just, cutesy, fluffy romance, but like they have a truly meaningful and deep connection between the two of them. It's always been one of my favorites. I reread it over and over when I was a teenager, and I still enjoy rereading it as an adult. It's just so beautifully written, and I love all the Christian themes that are included in the book. 5 stars every time. I also read Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth. This is another favorite from the year, definitely. And I've done a whole nother video all about Belinda and how much I loved it. So Belinda's aunt sends her to stay with Lady Delacour, the most popular lady in all of London. And she's hoping that Belinda will meet lots of wealthy young men and make a brilliant match. This plot is just full of drama and suspense and mystery. And there are lots of little plot threads that go weaving around in various directions with different characters. Every page is just so witty and charming, and I love this book so much. This might be my second favorite from the year. Like, if Heart of Midlothian is my first favorite, then probably Belinda is my second favorite classic that I've read this year. I mean, this one just blew me away. So make sure that you go over and watch the video. I go into all this in-depth stuff about the different characters and the characters' relationships with each other and this moral implication with this social obligation and like all kind of stuff. I get really in-depth into all the layers that go into that book. I also reread Persuasion for Jane Austen July, but this year I reread it in Spanish, and I really enjoyed kind of revisiting this beloved story, which Persuasion is probably my second favorite of Jane Austen's books. But it was so interesting revisiting it in another language. It just gives it a little bit of a different flavor, a little bit of a different feeling. And of course, I've done a video all about Persuasion, and I will link that in the description. So be sure to go over there and see all the reasons why I absolutely love rereading Persuasion over and over and over again. It's the letter, am I right? I mean, everybody knows the best part of that book is the letter because it's just so wonderful. And I have some nonfiction, some classic nonfiction that I read this year. I read The Liberty of Obedience by Elizabeth Elliot. This was published in 1968, so it just comes in under classics for my cutoff date of 1970. This is all about how obedience to Christ is actually more liberating than you realize. We tend to put all of these sort of social obligations onto Christians, like, well, if you're not a real Christian unless you do this and this and this. But if you look at what the Bible actually says, the things that God really requires of us are liberating. They're a joy to do. Obeying God's actual laws and not what man tells you to do actually ends up giving you more freedom than you could imagine. So I really enjoyed that. I felt like it was very insightful. And it was a really interesting look at how we put man-made rules on ourselves that God never intended us to carry that burden or to follow those rules. God's rules are actually pretty simple, and obeying them is a joy. And I also read The Mind of the Maker by Dorothy Sayers. This one broke my brain. I mean, I will never think about God or eternity or creativity or the Trinity or any of that the same way ever again, because this book absolutely blew my mind. I've done a whole nother video about The Mind of the Maker, and I tried to kind of explain what she talks about in that book, but there's just so much. The scope of it is just so huge that you can't possibly talk about it in one video. But I did my best in that review video to kind of give an overview of the book and what I thought was so amazing about it. So I will link that in the description. Be sure to go over and watch that video if you want to hear more about Dorothy Sayers. And as part of the June Journeys with Inklings readathon, I read The Weight of Glory from C.S. Lewis. This is a collection of some different essays from C.S. Lewis. Some of them were ones that actually I had read before, but not just in this particular collection. And I've done a whole nother video all about The Weight of Glory, taking an in-depth look at each of the essays and what topics it talks about. And of course, you guys know I love C.S. Lewis, so I really enjoyed reading that one. And the last book that I have to talk about today is Letters to the Galatians and Ephesians by William Barclay. This was published in 1954. So this is a Bible commentary that goes verse by verse in these books of the Bible and kind of expands on different cultural traditions from the time of Paul and how certain words are translated from the Greek or from the Hebrew. It was really interesting, and I really enjoyed getting way deep into analyzing every verse and every passage and really just kind of extracting all that good insight from the Word of God. And those are all the classics that I read in 2025. Please leave me a comment and let me know what are some of your favorite classics that you've read this past year. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.